Welcome to the EOC position-specific training for the logistics section. Today's training is primarily meant to provide you with an overview of the functions of the logistics section, teach you how each EOC section interacts with the logistics section, familiarize you with the position-specific responsibilities, go over what specific positions your position may interact with, and finally provide you tools to help you carry out your position responsibilities. Essentially, this course is meant to provide you with as many tools as necessary to carry out your position responsibilities. Upon completion of this training, you will have a better understanding of the role and responsibilities that logistics plays within the EOC, better understand position-specific responsibilities within the logistics section, how each logistics position will interact with other positions within the EOC, and understand what EOC forms the logistics section is responsible for. Let's do a quick refresher of the EOC structure that we talked about in EOC 101. So there are 5 functions within the EOC: management, operations, planning, logistics, and finance admin. This is a NIMS and ICS concept, so therefore it's mirrored at every level of response, locally to state. The EOC structure is expandable and flexible, and it works off the principle of activating only what is needed. Positions will be dependent on the response level, so not all positions may be staffed in an event. Management and planning sections are normally staffed, and just remember that the section coordinators are responsible for all the work in their section, even if their section isn't fully staffed or activated. Some of the roles and responsibilities for each of those 5 sections. Management section, they're developing the overall incident objectives and strategy, approving and signing off on that EOC action plan. Operations, they're assisting with the development of that strategy. They're identifying, assigning, and supervising the resources needed to accomplish those objectives created in the EOC. The planning section, they're providing those status reports, maintaining the planning process, that planning P, and they're producing that EOC action plan. Logistics section is ordering resources, and they're developing that internal transportation and communication plan as needed. And finance admin section is keeping track of those costs, developing some cost analysis. They're making sure that our EOC action plan is within the financial limits that's established by the management section or maybe even the policy group. They're developing those contracts and paying for those resources as well. So let's start diving into the logistics section. The logistics section primarily is responsible for ensuring the acquisition, transportation, and mobilization of resources that support the response efforts at the disaster sites, public shelters, EOC, etc. This section provides all the necessary personnel, supplies, and equipment procurement support. Methods for obtaining and using facilities, equipment, supplies, services, and other resources to support emergency response at all operational sites during emergency and disaster conditions will be the same as those that are used during normal operations, unless it's authorized by the emergency management coordinator, the EOC manager, or emergency orders of a higher authority. The logistics section ensures all other sections are supported for the duration of the incident. This includes any personnel, equipment, and supplies or services that are required by those sections. Those are going to be ordered through the logistics section. The logistics section will also accomplish the following tasks during the emergency, such as coordinating provision of logistical support with the EOC manager, determining the organizational logistical support needed and the plan for both immediate and long-term requirements, and they're maintaining proper and accurate documentation for all the actions taken and all of the items that were procured through the logistics section. Some of the key skills that we like our logistics section to have is they know the sources of key equipment and personnel. They have knowledge of capital assets. They understand resource typing, which we'll be talking about here in a few minutes, and they have knowledge of those purchasing policies and procedures. The planning P is the process for which we go from incident objectives from the field, creating our EOC objectives. What do we need to order to support those EOC objectives? What is the plan going to be? Getting that EOC action plan created, getting it approved, briefing out that plan, and starting the new operational period by getting new objectives. What's those resources? So it's the process which we are doing that. So the planning P for logistics, the meetings that are typically going to be involved in, the initial briefing. What's going on? What's the field doing? What are we being asked to help with? Then we go to the step 4, that objectives meeting. What are our EOC objectives going to be? Start to get some of that policy down. How are we what's the flow of information in and out, any kind of policies like that? What are we doing for that? The resource meeting, that is going to be key. What resources are we going to be needing? So operations is going to be saying, this is what the plan is for tomorrow, for the next operational period. This is what we need. And then logistics goes and looks at what the needs are and can they support that? Do we have those resources already on hand, or do we need to bring in more resources for that next operational period? The planning meeting is when we go in front of the EOC manager and we are saying, these were your objectives that you came up with. These are the strategies for which we are going to meet those objectives. This is the plan that we're going to implement. And then each of the sections say whether they can support, and then the EOC manager approves or denies the plan at that point. They approve it. We go on to developing that EOC action plan. We then brief it out to everybody. We start our new operational period, do those tasks that implement that plan, put that plan to action that we came up with the day before, the operational period before. And then we start to look forward to the next operational period. We start that cycle all over again. Before we dive into the position-specific pieces of the logistics section, let's talk a little bit about resource management. Let's talk a little bit about acquisition strategies. Effective resource management includes establishing resource acquisition procedures. It's important to consider the trade-offs, i.e. shelf life and warehousing costs, and determine what that optimal acquisition strategy will look like. This includes acquiring critical resources in advance and storing them in a warehouse, like we're stockpiling, or are we supplying those resources just in time using a pre-incident contract? Another piece to resource management is systems and protocols. So for systems, what are we using to collect, update, and process resource data, track the status and the location of those resources? Whatever we're using, it's critical to have a redundant system or backup systems to manage those resources if the primary system is disrupted or unavailable. We also want to have protocols. We want to develop those standard protocols to request those resources. How do we prioritize those requests? Activating and mobilizing those resources to the incident and returning those resources to normal status. We want to have a cradle-to-grave tracking system. Some of those systems that we might utilize is a tracking sheet. We have Web EOC to track our state requests. We even have the ability to track using T-cards if that's the way we want to go. The status of those resources usually going to be available in staging, they're on scene, they're working on a site, or they're out of service. Maybe they're resting, they're down for maintenance, etc. So our resource management process is fairly simple. We start with determining what resources are needed. We request those resources using a 213RR. We then have our logistics section ordering that resource. They're finding it and they're starting to track the cost of that resource. Then we're deploying that resource. We're getting it out in the field. We're starting to track that resource there. And then when we're all said and done with that resource, we're no longer needing it. We're then demobilizing the resource. So a cradle to grave process. Resource typing is a way for us to standardize the language when we're requesting equipment and managing resources during an incident. So the National Incident Management System approves a method which we're characterizing those assets and providing mutual aid partners during an emergency. We are using that standardized language to then appropriately request the resources that are needed. This is going to help us reduce costs by eliminating orders that for equipment that may be inaccurate or inappropriate for the situation. We don't want to order if a public works department says they need a dump truck. Do we send them a dump truck that is sized for a quarry that isn't even going to fit on the roads? You know, we want to make sure that we're ordering the appropriate equipment. We also do the same for personnel. We want to make sure that the personnel that we're getting are trained up to what they need. So if we are saying we need a hazardous response subject matter expert, you know, we want to actually get somebody who is trained in those hazardous materials that we're dealing with. So we want to make sure we're getting that information. So the way we're doing that, FEMA actually has a nice little resource typing library tool. So it's a full catalog of NIMS resources, their typing, their definitions, job titles. It even has some qualification sheets. This is actually where we got our position task book information from as well. It's all released and maintained by FEMA. It's public access. It's a web-based tool, so it allows us to easily search and find what we're looking for. Now, when we talk about the finance side of it, you know, we also want to then marry up and match up those costs. So that's where having this documented appropriately, because if we get a certain sized piece of equipment, we want to make sure that we're getting that our finance team is documenting the appropriate cost for that size equipment. So if we have a chainsaw, are we talking, you know, a very, very small chainsaw, which is only going to be $3.15 an hour, or are we talking a larger chainsaw? Now we're talking $3.50 an hour. So now we're talking, how are we recouping some of this cost for reimbursement? So resource typing is very important to understand. How do we order resources? So what is the process of the information coming into the EOC to order the resource to the resource getting out into the field where it's needed? So in 213RR, a 213 resource request form, is going to be completed by the unit coordinator. They've received the request from the field. They're filling in all that information that is needed. What type of equipment they're using, that resource typing to determine all of the other pieces that are needed for that. We want to make sure, again, we're ordering the right equipment. Then that 213 is going to go to the operations section coordinator. They're going to validate that that resource request is eligible for fulfillment through the EOC by confirming that it's related to the incident. The requester cannot get that resource on their own, and the EOC should obtain that resource. They're verifying that the request has the proper authorization documentation as well. They're also going to reach out to that requester. They're going to verify that let them know that that request has been received. If there's any information that needs to be clarified, we're going to do that at that time and making sure that all of those required fields are complete. The operations section coordinator is also going to help determine the priority of those resources. If there are multiple requests coming in for the same resource, if we can't get enough to handle all of them, who is going to get priority on that? If we can't decide that within the operations section, we may need to bring in the policy group to help make those determinations. So the operations section is going to determine whether that resource request is available from other departments and functions within the operations section. So maybe we can reach out to another section within the operations section, another unit. They may have that resource available that they can then send over. And then we don't need to include logistics section. If the resource request is not available through those sources, then we're going to need to forward that 213RR to the logistics section. So now logistics section has that 213RR from the operations section. We need to figure out a source for that resource. We're going to determine the availability from various sources, including our mutual aid channels, possibly from the county or intrastate, volunteer organizations as well. We may have private sector sources if we want to engage the finance section if procurement and contracting is needed to obtain those sources. And then we also have the ability to, for state and federal governments via state EOC, which we would use Web EOC if we were requesting any state assets. If the request is submitted to the state EOC, the logistics section is going to log that state tracking number, communicate the status of this request to the requester, and communicating with the state to make sure that determine the status of that request that was sent in. It may be necessary to fill multiple requests from multiple sources. If this is the case, we need to determine what sources described will fill that request and collect any of the information regarding the transaction type and the source's status with respect to filling the request. If the specified request is not immediately available and an alternate source is identified based on the mission description, the logistics section must ask the requester to approve the alternate resource. We want to make sure that we're still sending them what they're asking for. Logistics and finance personnel should determine the spending limits, purchasing authorities, and other resource ordering decision points during the incident. Logistics and finance sections should work together to ensure all the procurement rules, financial tracking procedures are followed and documented to complete the financial payment information associated with the request. This can include determining if any provisions or rules exist specific to the transactions to procure the resource. Example, any special conditions or limitations stipulated in the contract or the purchase order. They're obtaining that project payment code that may be established by the finance section for the disaster, collecting any purchase, contract reference, or financial tracking numbers specific to the resource request, obtaining a total cost estimate, as well as obtaining a cost breakdown if multiple sources are providing the resources. Lastly, they're then maintaining a status log of the resource request form on the request resource request tracking sheet, and they're communicating the status and the tracking number to the requester. So we're getting that resource request into the EOC. We're documenting it on a 213 resource request form. It's going to the operations section coordinator. They're validating, they're verifying and approving that form. If we can't get it within the operations section, whatever they're looking for, we're going to forward that off to the logistics section or the supply procurement section. They're going to approve it, source it, order it, get it going. If we need to bring in the finance section, they're going to approve any costs that are associated with that resource request. And if it's outside of the spending limits, we may have to then send it off to the policy group or the EOC manager to get that approved. Once it's approved, then it comes back and we can get that ordered and such. We want to make sure that we're tracking this. We're using our tracking. We're letting people know. And then once we have that, we're getting it delivered and distributed. We want to keep track of that because we also want to then, if it's not being utilized, if we're paying for this and we're paying for it on a daily rate, how long do you need it for? Great. We need to be able to track it using our logs and such, so that way then we can say, okay, we've got it. Our request was for 2 days of this equipment. We're now on day 2. Do we still need it? Do we need to redo this contract? Do we need to order it for a few more days, or can it be then demobilized and sent back so we can take it off of our books? So this process is still being worked right now. We do not have an electronic version within the EOC to do this. We are looking at some options for some software that is coming. So at this point, we're looking to do this paper-wise. So 213 forms, moving our way through. We're going to have to keep meticulous documentation, keep track of everything, so that way we don't let any of our resource requests fall through the cracks. So again, the logistics section will maintain a system for processing and tracking those resource requests. This again could be utilizing the EOC 213, a resource request form, or another form, as well as a tracking sheet to track the resource request through the request management process. They're also sharing that information with the EOC planning section to track those resources once they're deployed to the incident. So that helps take some of that load off of the logistics section. The finance section is going to be responsible for tracking all of that resource time that it was used during the deployment, as well as the cost procedures. This holds true for any resource, including mutual aid resources. The tracking sheets, right now we're using an Excel spreadsheet that was designed to provide as an alternate option for the EOC logistics section to track those resource requests, as well as resource deployments. The fields in the resource request tracking sheet align to the fields within the resource request form, the 213RR. Now let's dive a little bit into the logistics-specific positions. The logistics section coordinator is a member of the EOC manager's general staff, and they're responsible for managing and coordinating the logistical response efforts and the acquisition, transportation, and mobilization of resources. They need information to help understand the current situation so that they can predict probable resource needs and prepare alternate strategies for resource management and procurement. The logistics section coordinator is going to activate organizational elements within the logistics section as needed, and they're going to monitor the section activities continuously and modify those as needed as well. They're going to determine any section or unit staffing that is needed and order and release staff as necessary. They're ensuring that the supply unit, if activated, coordinates closely with the purchasing unit in the finance admin section, and that all required documents and procedures are completed and followed. They're going to ensure that the supply and personnel units, if activated, coordinate relevant activities with appropriate units within the various EOC sections. They're going to ensure that all resources are tracked and accounted for in coordination with the resource tracking unit, as well as any resources ordered through mutual aid. Logistics section coordinator is going to make sure that any transportation requirements to support the response operations are met, and standing up the ground support unit if necessary. They're going to ensure that all requests for facilities and facility support are addressed through the facility unit leader. Regularly coordinate with the resource status and tracking unit, because again, they're keeping track of what the status of those resources are that they've ordered. Identify resources that may be demobilized early and advise those other section coordinators of that capability. They're going to coordinate with the food unit to ensure that food is being provided to the EOC and field personnel if needed. And they're going to ensure the communication requirements to support response operations are met. So if it's determined that the comms IT unit is need to be stood up, this unit is responsible for managing all the computing needs, including desktop, laptop computers, network and communications, including internet, wireless, telephones, radios, etc., printing, audio, visual, and other technology needs for the EOC. This unit will coordinate with all sections and branches, groups, units on operating procedures for computing, networking, and communication systems. They will provide support for all of the EOC information systems, ensuring automated information links are maintained, including, if applicable, audio, visual, and teleconferencing equipment. They will assist in developing the radio communications plan, the EOC 205 form, for all radio communication modes within the EOC and field when necessary. They will determine what communications equipment is necessary. They're going to provide technical information as required, manage those data and telephone services for the EOC, receive any priorities or special requests for IT and communications needs, provide communication briefing and technology status reports as requested at action planning meetings, ensure communication system components are installed, tested, and maintained, and they are going to keep the logistics section coordinator informed of system failures and restoration activities. So if the ground support unit is stood up, they are going to be responsible for coordinating the allocation of transportation resources required to move people, equipment, and essential supplies during the emergency response and recovery operations. So this is going to be, how do we take any of those resource requests that come in from the field and get it transported out to the field for them to utilize? Responsibilities include planning, assigning, and coordinating all transportation operations concerning deployment and use of agency vehicles. They're disseminating local and regional information pertaining to transportation, transit, and parking. They're ensuring the transportation of emergency personnel, equipment, and supplies, developing any traffic plans needed surrounding the incident and incident facilities such as the EOC. They're distributing the information needed on transportation-related events to the EOC sections. They're going to coordinate with the Transportation Lifeline, our ESF1 and ESF3, as well as local transportation agencies. They're coordinating with the situation unit to determine the status of the transportation routes in and around the area. They're going to coordinate with ESF3 to determine the progress of the routes in the recovery phase. So how are those roads being cleared? When can we open up stuff and get transportation change? They're coordinating transportation activities and needs with supply and procurement, personnel units, operation units, public information, as well as the liaison officers. They're going to keep that logistics section coordinator informed of significant issues affecting the ground support unit. Coordinating with any development of contracts for transportation vendors. They're going to coordinate that with the finance admin section, and they're going to establish contact with any local transportation agencies and schools to establish the availability of equipment and transportation resources if there is a need for evacuation or other operations as needed. Make sure to include access and functional need considerations and partner with local non-governmental agencies that may have vehicles as well. The personnel unit leader may have a few roles and responsibilities that you might confuse with the resource unit leader. The best way to delineate between the resource unit and the personnel unit is our resource unit, we're tracking those resources that have already been ordered or already on scene, whereas our personnel unit, they're ordering those resources, the personnel needed. So the personnel unit is going to establish those staffing schedules. They're going to identify staffing shortages, making sure that these personnel are being tracked, signing in and out. That's where there might be some crossing with the resource unit leader. Making sure that we just want to make sure that they're signing in and out. And they're doing this at both the EOC and any other site that we may be ordering resources for. So our personnel unit leader is going to be responsible for obtaining and coordinating as well as allocating all non-fire and non-law enforcement mutual aid personnel support requests. They're going to register and coordinate volunteers. We may need to coordinate some feeding and caring for the emergency workers, and including the overall coordination and care of all the county staff, both paid and volunteer. If this unit is determined to need more personnel, the unit leader will supervise anyone assigned to the personnel unit. They're going to be coordinating all personnel support requests received at or within the EOC, including any personnel support requested from EOC functional elements or from county response elements in the field. They're identifying sources and maintaining an inventory of personnel support and volunteer resources. And they are also requesting personnel resources from other departments as well as external agencies. This unit leader is going to coordinate with the liaison officer and the safety officer to ensure access, badging, identification, and proper direction for the responding personnel upon their arrival at the EOC. They're going to make sure that that organizational chart, the 203 or the 207, and any display boards are accurate. They're also going to review any volunteer agency policies and agreements, track and ensure that volunteer responsibilities are coordinated. So they're going to be working with our volunteer coordination unit leader as well. They're identifying, recruiting, and registering volunteers as required as part of that. They're also going to coordinate with the liaison and the safety officer to make sure that all EOC staff, including the volunteers, have a current situation and safety briefing upon check-in. We want to make sure everybody understands any of the policies and procedures of being in the EOC. They're going to track and record and report any staff time for all of the personnel volunteers working at the emergency or disaster. So we want to make sure that we're accounting for everybody's time. So this is why HR is in that. HR and finance are going to be working closely together with that. They're going to, if we need to, we might need to establish a plan for some childcare or pets for county employees. If that's needed, we would try to coordinate that through this group. And we want to make sure that we're assisting and supporting any of our own employees and their staff who might also be disaster survivors. So this unit will help in those aspects as well. So the The unit leader may have to coordinate with the safety officer as well as some other agencies to determine if we need crisis counseling for emergency workers or acquire any mental health specialists if needed for those situations. And then we're also going to be coordinating with the resource status and tracking unit to make sure that they are tracking those resources that the personnel unit orders and brings on board. We just talked about how we order personnel. So how do we order supplies and equipment? That's done through the supply and procurement unit. They're responsible for obtaining and delivering all non-fire, non-law enforcement mutual aid materials, equipment, and supplies that support emergency operations. If further personnel are assigned to the supply and procurement unit, the unit leader will supervise them. They're coordinating activities with the finance admin section coordinator, and they're determining if there's any purchasing authority that needs to be delegated to the supply and procurement unit. They're reviewing any emergency purchasing and contract procedures and establishing those spending limits. They're going to also coordinate with the logistics section and operations section on all matters involving the purchase, hire, contract, rental, and leases of resources. They're overseeing the acquisition and allocation of supplies, materials, and equipment not normally provided through the mutual aid agreements or through normal agency channels. They're determining if the requested supply types, quantities, materials, and equipment are available within inventory or are from the area. And they can determine if an item can be provided without cost from another agency or jurisdiction. So FEMA factors for considering the funding of equipment, we want to know the cost analysis, the estimated time or the length of the period the equipment is to be used, and what extent of use is going to be within that period, the financial and operating advantages of alternate types and makes of equipment, the purchase price, transportation and installation costs, maintenance and other service costs, availability of purchasing options, trade-in and salvage value, availability of a servicing capability. All of this factor into what we can order and what can be reimbursed. So we think about this as an example. A tub grinder, if we purchase one, its cost is $300,000. If we rent one, it's $120 per day. We need to run it for 12 hours a day for 20 days. $30,000 is that cost. So does it make sense to purchase the tub grinder, or do we just rent it? These are things that the supply and procurement unit leader is going to need to determine during an incident. The supply and procurement unit leader, they're going to acquire and coordinate any staging areas or facilities alongside the facilities unit. They're going to coordinate any vendor contracts that may not have previously been addressed by existing approved vendor lists. They're coordinating donated goods and services from community groups and private organizations with the donation management unit. And they're coordinating with that resource unit leader to facilitate all resource requests and making sure that that tracking log is maintained for all of those resources. The facilities unit is responsible for ensuring essential facilities are provided for the response effort, including securing access to the facilities and providing staff, furniture, supplies, and materials necessary to configure the facilities in a manner adequate to accomplish the mission. They ensure that adequate building floors, and workspaces are returned to their original state when they're no longer needed. If additional personnel are needed, they're supervising, the unit leader is supervising those personnel that are assigned to the facility unit. They're preparing the layout of any incident facilities as directed by the EOC coordinator or logistics section coordinator, overseeing maintenance specialists working on the facilities and determining requirements for each facility identified to be activated. The unit leader will maintain a log of facilities and/or properties under the management of the facilities unit. They're assessing the needs of the EOC and field incident command posts for field facility resources, and they're ensuring that all structures are safe for occupancy and comply with ADA requirements. So questions that the facilities unit leader is going to be asking is, what are the space needs? Is the capacity at the EOC adequate? Are there enough hotels, cots for all the workers if we have to start thinking that it's not safe for people to try to get home? Is there need for a cooking space? We're lucky enough at the EOC, we do have the ADRC kitchen down the hall. Is there a need to coordinate or acquire additional space? What are the available options? And do we have any pre-identified sites within the county which might be able to fit the needs? And getting contracts for different facilities and resources. Roles and responsibilities include notifying EOC units of facility locations and/or layouts, developing and maintaining a status board or reference that depicts the locations of each facility, a general description of furnishings, supplies, and equipment at that site, hours of operation, and the facility manager's name and phone number. They're assisting the EOC coordinator and the comms information IT system unit personnel with any facility-related issues, ensuring the EOC facility is maintained in a clean and sanitary condition, and the infrastructure such as power, water, HVAC system, restrooms, etc., operate satisfactory. They're coordinating any necessary facility repairs and service, ensuring all facilities are maintained in a safe and secure condition. As facilities are vacated, they're coordinating with the facility manager to return the location to its original state. This includes removing and returning furnishings and equipment, arranging for janitorial services, locking, or otherwise securing the facility. And they are also keeping the logistics section coordinator informed of any significant issues affecting the facilities unit. We've all got to eat, so how are we managing that? We're going to activate our food unit, which is going to establish and disseminate a feeding plan that identifies cost limits, authorized vendors, catering companies, types of food, etc. They're going to be considerate of potential special diets. They're setting that meal schedule, setting up and managing the eating areas for the staff. They may end up establishing personnel feeding accounts for the EOC, support and field personnel at local restaurants. And if that is the case, then they will brief all EOC personnel on that location, any cost limitations, and an incident number used for those restaurants or caterers. As food unit leader, we want to make sure we're setting up those meal schedules, keeping in mind any impact of any curfews that may impact the businesses that you plan on using. Obtain any necessary equipment, supplies, and facilities to establish food service, including hot and cold storage and/or handling. They're ensuring food service areas meet appropriate health and safety measures and are maintained in a clean condition. They're also going to order a sufficient amount of food and water through the supply unit, maintain an inventory of food, water, condiments, and supplies, and coordinate with the supply and procurement unit to ensure all purchases are pre-approved and paid for. So if an incident is large enough, we may expect to see some donations from the general public and businesses. We will want to stand up a donation management unit as they are responsible for the coordination of the donations. They're verifying the source of the donation, what the actual donation is. You know, where are we going to keep these donations? How long are we going to keep them for? If this is something that we're not going to take, who can we pass these donations off to? And then if there isn't a plan in place, we want to work to create a just-in-time plan that will assess the situation, determine the needs for any monetary or in-kind donations, determining the priorities for allocation of donations, establishing a mechanism for receiving and distributing monetary donations, opening, staffing, and operating site for collecting, storing, and distributing in-kind donations, and developing and disseminating public information regarding those donations. The likelihood that this unit will have multiple people underneath this unit leader is very likely. So the unit leader is going to supervise anyone else assigned to the donation management unit. They're going to be working with the planning section to identify donation needs of life safety supplies and services, think your heat, food, water, ice, and develop a plan to receive and quickly distribute these resources to the affected community members. They're going to coordinate with the resource unit to track all of these resources, and we're going to communicate and coordinate with external partners and national non-governmental organizations to support effective donation management. They're going to serve as the point of contact with the private sector that want to donate goods and services, and coordinate with the public information, including the Joint Information Center if they're activated, to maintain consistent public messaging about donations. If we do not manage these donations coming in, it will create a disaster within a disaster. We do not want to be like Hurricane Katrina, where all of these unnecessary clothes and other supplies were donated, and it all ended up in a pile that had to be disposed of at a local dump down the road. So if we need donations, we can ask for them, we can accept them, but we just need to be communicating the needs out. It is in our nature to want to help. So in addition to donating supplies, people are also going to want to help themselves as well. So we may have people coming and showing up in our disaster areas that want to help homeowners, help clean up. We want to coordinate that, being either with a volunteer reception center or getting them affiliated with a established volunteer group. We want to collect those hours and the equipment that they're bringing in, because all of this then supports the community on the back end when we talk reimbursement. So a local church gets together, as long as they're signing in and signing out, usually on that 211 form, documenting where they're going, what they're doing, what equipment was brought, we can track those and utilize that to help offset some of the cost of the disaster for that municipality. So it's definitely something we want to continuously track. In a larger event where people are just coming out of the woodworks, we may have to set up a volunteer reception center that will help us coordinate those volunteers and making sure that everything is being done safely and that our communities aren't being impacted by people running around willy-nilly, or maybe even people that don't have the best intentions and try to take advantage of the situation. So we help by setting up this volunteer coordination point to help funnel all of that so we're getting those resources out to the appropriate locations. People aren't running around impacting response efforts, like life safety response efforts that still may be going on. So this unit will help with all of that. This will not be a one-person show, so the volunteer coordinator for the unit is going to be supervising anybody assigned to the volunteer coordination unit. They're going to be working closely with the operations and planning section to identify volunteer needs and to develop a plan to distribute these volunteers to the necessary places. They're going to coordinate with the resource tracking unit to make sure that we're tracking all of those volunteer resources. They're going to staff the volunteer team in the EOC and support the planning section resource unit leader and the logistics section unit as well. And they're going to manage the volunteer process that may include some of that's going to include document management for volunteers. Let's quickly go through some EOC forms that the logistics section will be utilizing. The comms IT unit might be asked to assist with creating a 205 form. This is for radio communications. So if we are communicating from the field into the EOC, or the EOC is communicating out to any agencies, any facilities that we're using, if we have a direct line for radio communication from the EOC to a family assistance center, to the volunteer reception center, anything like that, we want to know what channel we need to be on, who's going to be monitoring that channel, all of that information. We're collecting that here in the 205. The logistics section is also responsible for maintaining a medical plan. So this will likely be coordinated with our safety officer. In an incident, where are we getting our initial first aid, where are AEDs, stuff like that, in the facility that we're working in? What are the hospitals, that are available? What's the transport time, anything like that? What is the medical plan if somebody gets hurt or injured? We know that, as we've seen in past disasters, that maybe a facility is affected, so we do need to check in when we create this plan, checking in with that facility, make sure that they are open, that they are taking, people in. Or maybe they've set up a separate site off, a tent site or something for your non-injured, stuff like that. So working with our EMS departments and our hospitals to fill out this plan. We do have a basic one already filled out for Eau Claire County for the EOC. That would just need to be verified that those facilities are current and are, they're functional at that point of time during the disaster. If not, then we would have to adjust that plan. The resource status change form, the 210, this is just how we are changing the status of a resource that's assigned. So if the operations section gets a call saying, hey, this resource is either they're down because they've been on for 8 hours and they need downtime, or maybe something broke, we can then document that the status of that resource has changed. This also could be transmitted with a general message, a 213 form, that we can then say, hey, the status of this has changed. It goes to the resource unit leader, and the resource unit leader is filling out this 210. But just know that this form is available so that we can track the status change of any resource that is currently on an operation. The 213 form is just used to transmit messages. So think of this as like your text messaging. We want to have some kind of a documentation that between people to let them know that something is happening, and then we have a paper record that goes with it. So typically, if we need to say, we need somebody to determine priorities within the MAC group of a certain request. We've got 3 municipalities requesting, equipment, and we can only get 2. What would those what would those priorities be? We can then write that out in the message, send it to the MAC group. They can then write out their response and say the priority, we've determined that these 2 will get priority. This one, keep working on trying to find them something, or when something becomes available, when one of those 2 become available, send it there. Their message, they can reply back to it. So it's basically a text message between groups. This is our 213RR. This is how we're requesting those non-mutual aid supplies, services, personnel, teams, utilities, fuel, etc. This is the form that we're going to fill out when we get that resource request in. Goes through the unit up to the EOC or the operations section coordinator. Goes to logistics, possibly finance. that, and then back, this is how we're ordering. So this is a good form to get familiar with and how to fill this form out. The operations planning worksheet, this EOC 215 form, this worksheet is used when we're trying to determine these are our objectives, these are the resources that we need to complete those resources, and then we can list out what resources we have and determine if we need to order some resources. So let's take a damage assessment team example. So in that third column, we can write out, we're going to do damage assessments in Altoona. We can do the next line, we could say in the city of Eau Claire, we can get all of those, we can list out all those cities. Now we can say up along the top on those empty bars on that second row, we can start to write in, okay, we need trucks, we need personnel, we need protective equipment, anything like that, we can write along the top. Now we can come in and say, okay, the operations section coordinator will say, okay, the Altoona team, I need 5 trucks and I need 10 personnel to go with those trucks. Then for the city of Eau Claire, I only need 3 trucks and I need 6 personnel to go with those, and then I need PPE for all of those personnel. Now, as logistics, you can come in on the I have line and you can write in, okay, well, I only have 5 vehicles to split between the 2. I've only got 7 personnel currently identified and assigned to this operation, and I've got, I've got enough PPE. So what happens now is the resource unit leader comes in and says, okay, we don't have enough resources. So if this is our plan and we can't change our plan, this is what we need to order. And they will start to take those 213 resource request forms and fill it out according to this worksheet and then turn those into logistics. And the logistics team will then, either the personnel team will start to order personnel if it's personnel that are needed, or the supply and procurement unit will start to order and find those equipment and those types of resources. So it's a great worksheet to help you visualize if you have enough resources to do what you want to do for each operational period. Everybody needs to sign in and sign out. We need to have accountability. So you will see this form likely at the EOC. We do have this available in a digital form, and we also have it available as a Microsoft Office form that can be filled out. The nice little YCAMS badges that we've handed out to you for your position, that can also be scanned in using a digital system and help us maintain accountability. This is also the form that we will have volunteers sign in and sign out on. It lets us know their name, what they're going to be doing, and their contact information, and then they sign in and sign out. And we do this for each operational period. The 214 activity log, this is where we're documenting any decisions, any actions that we took, or any conversations that we may need to log. So this is just our way of maintaining accountability on what you did for your job, for your position, that operational period. If we ever need to, we can pull this log. If somebody came back and says, hey, this wasn't done, we can go back to your log and go, yes, it was done. Specifically important, like if we start talking your position task books, now we can go back into through your logs and we can now document and say, per this activity log, you did this task already. We can get you signed off pretty quickly on your task books. Speaking of task books, the EOC 225, this is our performance rating. It's just a way for us to evaluate how you're doing in the EOC and to help you meet those position task book requirements and get you signed off. Eventually, we are going to see these position task books likely tied to some grant funding. So we're just getting ahead of the ball here and starting to implement these now. We want to bring these to any trainings, any exercises that we may do, any events, any real incidents, and at the end of that incident, we will work on getting those task books, any tasks that you may have completed during that event. We'll get you signed off on those. All right. Logistics is a big section, but congratulations, you've just finished the position-specific training for the logistics section. So next steps, we've got a quick logistics section quiz for you to take, multiple choice, no trick questions, I promise. You were given your position task book during EOC 101 training. Take that task book, start to fill it out. As we go through and do more training, as you come to exercises, we do real life events, we're going to start getting you signed off on that. We don't expect you to have that all done in one event. Just bring it with, it'll take us some time, but we'll get you signed off and get you listed as qualified in that position. We've also got a list coming up of some position-specific training. That is on the second page of your position task book as well. But I've also got a few courses that are online. There's 2 in-person ones that we highly recommend. But that list is coming up here. Also, we're going to have EOC drills. We're going to have additional EOC training and exercises. Those are going to be available on the emergency management calendar, so please watch that. We'll also send out emails with information on that and reminders as well. The courses that we recommend each person take, we've got Incident Command System, IS 100 and 200, the National Incident Management System, NIMS, IS 700, Resource Management for Logistics 703, as well as the National Response Framework IS 800. These courses are all online, available through FEMA. Take them on your downtime. They're not too hard. Those are courses that we highly recommend. We also would like to see EOC, the basic EOC functions, IS 2200, again, online, available for you to take on your downtime. In addition, if you want to learn more about the EOC forms, the planning P, all of that fun stuff there, all of the more positions and groups, units, divisions, all that great stuff that go into the incident command system, there is an ICS 300 course. That's a 3-day course that is put on by the state of Wisconsin. We usually have 1 to 2 every year in our area, so watch our calendar for that. Otherwise, they are available in other counties, neighboring counties as well. Lastly, ICS EOC interface. How does the field, what they're doing in the, that responding to in the field, how are they interfacing with us in the EOC? So that G191 course, it's a 1-day course in person, another great class to take to help work through that and meeting some of our area partners that you might be working with. Here's the QR code for the EOC logistics section quiz along with the link. Multiple choice, no trick questions. I want to ensure that the information that I provided you in this training meets minimum requirements for the logistics section. So I want to make sure that with what I'm teaching you, it's what I set out to teach. Thank you again for attending this training. I hope you found this very informative. If you have any questions or feedback, please email us at emergencymanagement@eauclaircounty.gov.